my guest, Daniel Kebede, the President of the National Education Union. Great to have you on the Politics Hub. So there's been lots of talk about pay recommendations from the pay review body. If the government doesn't accept them, will you go on strike?
Well, firstly, we need to see the report from the pay review body published. We don't want to find out what pay recommendations are from pay review bodies through the press. And quite frankly, that's been the experience of the last 24 hours. And it was a feature of previous governments, and we were hoping for something different from this one. What's really important, though, is that we see an above-inflation pay award that is fully funded, that takes steps to address the crisis in recruitment and retention, because of course we can't recruit or retain enough teachers at the moment, and that is forcing schools into crisis.
You say there that you want to see the full published recommendations, and I get that, of course, but I guess, my question still stands. If the government doesn't accept them, because the reports are that it could be 4% for teachers, which is more than Rachel Reeves has budgeted for, will you consider going on strike?
That would be a question for our executive and our members. I think it would be highly inflammatory, though, for the government not to accept recommendations from a pay review body if that pay recommendation is above 2.8%. We have to remember that this government were elected on the promise of change and with the promise of recruiting 6,500 new teachers. An admirable aspiration, but quite frankly, teachers need to be paid fairly to ensure that that happens.
I guess that what the government would say is that they would love to see more money for teachers. And look, you don't have to tell me that, I believe teachers are the backbone of this country. But what the government would say is they're having to juggle a very, very difficult economic picture. We've just been talking with our panel about the cuts to the international aid budget, for example, which could harm some of the poorest in the world. We've been talking about disability cuts. We've been talking about having to spend more money on defence, seeing what's happening in Ukraine. Do you accept that this picture may mean they can't do everything that they want to?
I certainly accept that the government has some difficult choices to make, but these are choices. And we believe that there is the wealth in this country to ensure that teachers and support staff, and of course doctors and nurses, can get the pay award that is necessary to ensure that our public services thrive. Of course, there are options for this government and for the Chancellor of the Exchequer: a wealth tax, a 2% wealth tax on those with assets over £10 million would raise around £24 billion. So there are other options available to government other than cutting health and education.
If because you're very clear that you want this to be fully funded, and this does feel like an important point. Because obviously they can pay teachers anything that they want if it has to be found within existing schools' budgets. If it is a pay rise from existing budget, what kind of cuts could we be seeing in schools?
Well, if you ask any head teacher now, or teacher for that matter, what efficiency can be found after 14 years of Conservative austerity, the answer will be none, not without cutting jobs or resources, or indeed both. And you have to bear in mind, we've had a series of unfunded pay awards prior to last year. And that has meant that we just do not have the auxiliary staff, the support staff in schools. We currently have some of the largest class sizes in Europe, 1 million children being taught in class sizes of 31 or more. We need fairly funded pay awards to ensure that education can thrive. And unfortunately, education isn't thriving at the moment.
I am officially out of time in the interview, but there's just one other question that I wanted to squeeze in while I have you, if that's okay, which is about EdTech. Because if you've got a child in school, you probably kind of notice that an awful lot of learning is done not just online, but through apps, a bit like gaming apps where you can get stars for learning your timetables or whatever it is. What's your view on EdTech? Is this like a really useful tool, or is it something that we should be wary of?
So artificial intelligence and EdTech is something that will be a part of education in the future. but who owns it, who controls it, whose interests it operates in, a contested area. Of course, you have Elon Musk, who thinks that we should just gamify education. I actually think that edtech could be used to reduce workload, to do some of the bureaucratic tasks, to ensure that teachers have the time and space to focus on what makes us human. So this is all contested at the moment, and I hope my vision for EdTech is the one that wins rather than sort of Elon Musk's, to be honest, because I don't think that is a good direction of travel.
Really interesting. It feels like that's just the beginning of a longer conversation, but great to have you on Politics Hub. Thank you.